So today I'm talking with Geoff Hoffman, longtime web developer specializing in user interface design, graphic design, SEO, and managing remote teams of developers. Geoff has been doing development since the early 90s, as I recall, and was an integral part of a new social network that complied with certain laws in the US. I'll let him tell you about that. Geoff and I met in about 2006 through an online forum where we were both contributing. Specifically, I responded to his request for programmers. That started our relationship, and although the business relationship ended a couple of years ago, I think of Geoff as a pioneer in remote working and someone I will always respect. And just to add a little background, the team Geoff assembled when I started working with him consisted of people located on all sides of the globe, literally. So he has a unique perspective on managing global development teams. So that said, welcome, Geoff.
Thank you.
Was that a good
Appreciate
introduction?
That was a great introduction.
So when do you recall was the first time you ever worked remotely with somebody?
Actually, going back, into the last century, actually, in the late '90s, I was working at a agency in downtown Chicago called Franklin Company, and that was the first company at which they employed a Cisco VPN router, and that was, I think, my first foray into virtualization. And kind of, I didn't understand, how any of it worked. I just knew that if I put this program on my computer, I could see my desktop at work.
Mm-hmm. So, what would you say is a typical day of somebody who's a remote developer, as far as you can tell, from your perspective?
A typical day is, roll out of bed, not getting dressed, and having a cup of coffee or a glass of orange juice, firing up the computer and seeing, what bugs have been filed in your ticket system or what emails you have with change requests, and then starting up your, web browser, your IDE, your development environment where you're going to write some code, work on a web page, whether it's Dreamweaver or NetBeans or Eclipse. Doesn't matter what platform, but it pretty much follows the same process. You check and see what's going on. You look at your to-do list, and pretty much code for a few hours, test for a few hours, check in some code, go for a walk. It's really nice to be able to set your own hours, and basically my time is my time, and as long as you're getting stuff done, there's nobody's going to be, hammering you, hey, knock, knock, knock on my screen, where's my stuff? It's they call it asynchronous communication. Yeah, it's important to, be able to formulate a complete sentence and not be afraid to, have a communication barrier. One of the guys that we worked with, Coase, it was funny because I actually called him once through Skype, and I could not understand him at all. So verbally, it was impossible. But he can write English. You'd think was your next door neighbor the way he writes in English. So every email, hey, let's call Coase, and wasn't happening.
How funny!
I said hello. That was about it.
I'm interviewing him. You know that, right?
Yeah, I hope he does. I hope he does better, and maybe that worked in global economy for a few years will help. Maybe it was just a bad connection.
Here, where I'm living now in the Canary Islands, people couldn't really conceive of how anybody would be willing to pay me to work without standing over my shoulder making sure I was actually working. How did you do that when you were at Saywire or wherever else you've worked? How do you make sure that people are actually doing the work they're supposed to do?
Well, in a lot of cases, it can be a challenge to know exactly what's being done. But I guess really anything that is going to be required to be developed, whether it's a website or a web application or a piece of code or software or graphic design, the end result is a digital file. And everybody who is involved in, some people are better than others at writing scope documentation and being specific about what the requirements are. With that said, somebody's got to take the first step. There's no question. You have to trust somebody that you may have never met. You may have never seen them in person. But somebody will take the first step and say, hey, okay, yes, why don't you go ahead and design a layout for my website? Or why don't you take a look at some code? I'll send you some examples of what I got. Maybe you can tell me and give me a price quote. So you can tell pretty soon if somebody is going to be able to help you just by looking at their online portfolio, samples they send you, etc. So that's the first step. Anyways, once you take that first step and you actually decide to work with someone remotely, it's pretty much just a matter of starting small with the smallest deliverables possible, and a reasonable time frame to get those done, whether it be a day or half a day, or tomorrow when I check my email, what will you have done? Or if it's Thursday, how about by Tuesday, you're prepared to show me 3 samples, or three design comps, or by this time tomorrow, will you be ready to have this code updated so I can take a look at your solution to the software problem? So, taking small steps in the early phases are critical to kind of getting used to working with someone remotely. And it's really important to, not overcommit, even though you may want to. It's like, oh, I just got a job over the internet. And you want to, do a whole entire website layout mock-up in 4 to 8 hours, and you might not get to that. So I think it's important to be realistic about how much you can accomplish right off the bat and set expectations. Because you don't want to promise somebody something and under-deliver, and it's always better to under-promise and over-deliver.
I agree. I agree. That's interesting. So being closer to people actually makes it more difficult to get clear requirements.
Yeah, I mean, having a face-to-face meeting with a bunch of developers, at the end of the day, people are more interested in, office politics and gossip and what happened, with the latest sports game than they are with, how do we format this SQL before we commit it to the repository? I mean, it's just human nature. So when you're actually face-to-face with people, a lot of times I think you get less done.
Interesting. I have to agree on that too, because I know that people used to say, well, I mean, the same old thing as before. If you don't have somebody standing over your shoulder, how are you motivated to get anything done? And the answer is because I don't have anyone standing over my shoulder, and I know what my task list is, and I just do it, and get it done. Unfortunately, I do get distracted periodically, and I like to read the news or whatever. But that's I think you need a break.
You get distracted. I work with 120 people in my company right now, and probably 70 or 80 of them are developers. And you walk to the kitchen to get a cup of coffee or whatever it may be, and there's people talking and visiting at each other's cubes, and hey, check this out on YouTube, and hey, I found this funny Facebook app, check it out. I mean, it's not like there's less work. There's actually more time to socialize in the office.
Do you happen to remember I guess it was maybe the late 90s, companies were afraid to give their employees internet because they were afraid they were just going to waste time on it?
I mean, there's no question that Facebook is a giant time suck, and I wouldn't, if I was a bank or an accounting firm or something, I'd probably block Facebook and MySpace, and my employees would hate me. But that's really meant for personal time, unless you're developing a Facebook app. Then, like my company right now has a division developing Facebook apps. Well, sorry, hey, I got to use Facebook all day. I mean, how cool is that?
What, in a nutshell, is the primary selling point for you when choosing to work remotely with somebody? It's kind of a vague question, but you see something that makes you go, that's the person I need to work with.
The number one aspect of an individual that would make me want to hire them remotely. Yeah, that is a pretty tough question. So a lot of factors are important.
Think about it for a minute if you want to.
I would say probably the number one thing is my own personal confidence that person has what it takes for the specific thing that I need them for. So that's more about what has transpired over the last, let's say you get introduced to someone and you talk to them, you look at their portfolio, you exchange emails, maybe you do a call. It's a slow, steady process before you start working with someone. You don't just, you know, see a blog post and hire the guy the next day. You have to kind of learn about the individual, and having the fact that you had a blog and that I could go and read articles you'd written in the past, that definitely contributed to building the confidence on my side to say, yeah, this guy knows what he's talking about.
So writing samples are an important part.
I would say writing samples is probably, and that all falls under the umbrella of communication.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be able to communicate with somebody, and if I have trouble understanding their email, or if there's confusion about samples or what kind of examples I'm looking for, I mean that can turn me off to somebody. So being able to follow direction is pretty key.
Okay.
And definitely if there's any typos in anything that you send to somebody, it's a definite red flag.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely check your spelling and your grammar anytime you communicate with somebody about a job.
Mm-hmm. Well, that actually is a great way for us to close this interview, because that's really, I think, the key for just about everybody. It's great because the theme is actually coming through on the interviews I've done so far. That's been a crucial theme for everybody. So
better communication.
Clear communication in writing is key to success in remote working.
I agree completely with that statement. So yeah, definitely good luck.
All right.
And listen to what he says. He knows what he's talking about.